Autumn winds whipped through the valleys of Thessaly in 352 BC, carrying the sharp tang of crushed thyme and distant wood smoke from villages huddled against the encroaching chill. You are Aristomache 19, summer's-old daughter of a noble house in Larissa, your skin still scented with the olive oil from morning's bath, your hair bound in the simple braids of a girl who dreams of marriage to a horseman, not chains. The air hums with the low murmur of the assemblymen's voices, rising like the bleat of goats on the hillside, debating the Phocian tyrants who have poisoned the sacred springs at Delphi. Then comes the thunder hooves on hard earth, 1,000 strong, shaking the ground beneath your sandaled feet. Dust clouds the sun, turning day to dusk, and through it strides the Macedonian phalanx sarissas, glinting like forest of iron teeth. The smell hits neck's sweat-soaked leather and oiled bronze, mingling with the metallic bite of fear from the crowd scattering like leaves. Your father's hand tightens on your arm, his ring digging into your flesh as the riders halt their king at the fore. Philip, one-eyed, scarred, his cloak stained with the mud of marches from Pella. He dismounts, boots sinking into the loamy soil, and his gaze sweeps the throng lingering on the women gathered at the edges, their chitons fluttering like captured flags. You feel it. Then the weight of that stare, cold as the blade at a sacrifice, stripping away names, reducing you to vessel to asset in a ledger of conquest. In that moment, as his lips curl in calculation, Philip raises a hand and the order falls like an axe. Take them, all the daughters of the tagoi. They will breed the future of my league. What kind of mind turns daughters into dynasties, nobility into broodmares? Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves sexual violence and systematic enslavement, the forced subjugation of women as reproductive tools in the machinery of ancient empire building. The details draw from fragmented ancient accounts, rhetorical flourishes in Demosthenes Philippics, echoes in Diodorus Siculus's Library of History, and Justin's Epitome, corroborated loosely by archaeological finds like the mass graves near Phyrae and inscriptions from the Thessalian League. But the scale of 500 noble daughters is contested, likely exaggerated by Athenian orators to demonize Philip as a barbarian enslaver of Hellenes. Recent scholarship, including Ian Worthington's Philip II of Macedonia 2008 and Eugene and Borza's Shadow of Olympus 1990, debates the extent, suggesting it stems from standard war practices where captives became chattel female nobility, often concubines, to secure loyalty or swell ranks. These aren't just horror stories, they're warnings about what unchecked power becomes when conquest blurs into commodification. If you need to step away, I completely understand. There's no judgment in choosing not to continue. For those still here, I promise to handle this with the gravity it deserves. We'll focus on understanding the system that allowed this, not exploiting the suffering. History is written by victors. Memory is written by survivors. This wasn't mere barbarism, a drunken king's whim after battle wine. This was a machine oiled by the gears of realpolitik and demographic desperation, grinding noble blood into the mortar of Macedonian expansion. Philip II, the lame-legged tactician who forged a backwater kingdom into the hammer of Hellenic unity, didn't stumble into atrocity. He engineered it. The breeding slavery of Thessalian daughters, whether 500 as Demosthenes thundered in his Third Philippic, or a smaller cadre as Justin implies in his summaries of Pompeius Trogus, was no aberration. It was protocol, a calculated infusion of Thessalian nobility into Macedonian veins to bind the League, produce hybrid heirs loyal to Pella, and counter the manpower shortages from endless border skirmishes. Sources disagree on numbers. Diodorus mentions thousands of Phocian prisoners drowned at Crocus Field, but for Thessalians, it's whispers of the tagoi's women parceled out like border forts. Archaeological evidence from 1980s digs at Vergina hints at influxes of non-Macedonian concubines in royal tombs, their grave goods bearing Thessalian motifs, horsehair plumes, amber beads from Larissa markets. Modern analysts like Joseph Roisman in the General Demosthenes 2015 argue it's propaganda, yet the kernel persists. War's victors claimed bodies as spoils, and Philip, ever the innovator, systematized it into eugenic policy. The question isn't whether you can handle the truth. It's whether you're willing to remember it to see how ancient ledgers prefigure modern asset stripping, where women's wombs become strategic reserves. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives. What Philip wrought in Thessaly wasn't conquest alone. It was erasure by assimilation, a slow alchemy turning freeborn daughters into the silent architects of his son's empire. Stakes were existential. Macedonia teetered on Illyrian spears, and Persian gold funneled to Greek rivals. Philip's machine didn't just enslave, it reproduced itself, ensuring loyalty through bloodlines that outlasted swords. Today, we glimpse parallels in forced migrations in policies that commodify bodies for state survival refugee camps as labor pool surrogacy rings in war zones. This narrative reframes not a monster, but a method how power, when cornered, devours its own future to secure the present. And in remembering, we arm ourselves against its recurrence. To understand what happened to those Thessalian daughters, you need to understand the machine that birthed Philip and the fractured world it chewed through. The 4th century BC was a cauldron of Greek disunity. The Thessalian League, a faded memory poleis like Athens and Thebes squabbling over scraps, while Persia pulled strings from afar funding proxies to keep Hellas divided. Macedonia, perched on the northern fringe, was no kingdom of fable, but a rugged patchwork of tribal clans, horse-herding barons, more Argead myth than centralized state. Economic factors gnawed at its edges. Silver mines at Pangaeum yielded coin, but timber for triremes and grain from Thessalian plains were lifelines controlled by fickle allies. Militarily, it was a powder keg, Illyrians raiding from the west, Paeonians from the north, Thracians east, each wave crashing against Pella's walls. Social hierarchies mirrored this chaos. The king, a first among equals nobles, heteiroi bound by oaths and feasts, commoners tied to the land like vines to trellises. Philip ascended in 359 BC. Amid this storm, his brother Perdiccas III, slain by Illyrians, leaving a 7-year-old heir and a regency teetering. According to Diodorus Siculus in Book 16, Philip, then 39, returned from Theban exile where he'd studied under Epaminondas, absorbing the oblique phalanx that would redefine warfare with eyes sharpened by hostage years. He ransomed the throne with bribes, reformed the army's short spears, for close quarters killing professional pay to forge loyalty from levies. But Thessaly loomed as the prize, its fertile valleys, the breadbasket feeding Macedonian garrisons, its cavalry, the thunder that could trample Athenian hoplites. Political climate simmered with the Third Sacred War. 356-346 BC Phocians desecrating Delphi, drawing in Thessalian factions, tyrants in Pherai versus the Alawati League in Larissa. Philip, invited south by anti-tyrant calls, saw opportunity control Thessaly, and the pass to Thermopylae opens Athens' flank exposed. Economic incentives abounded, tithe exemptions for loyal tagoi noble magistrates, Macedonian settlers on confiscated estates. As Worthington notes in his 2008 biography, Philip's interventions were diplomatic scalpel and military hammer, but beneath lay psychological warfare, fear, as currency alliances sealed in blood or bed. These events are documented in primary sources like Demosthenes' Orations, 347-341 BC, writing within living memory corroborated by epigraphic evidence, decrees from the Thessalian League etched in stone at Delphi, dated 346 BC, naming Philip Archon for life. A letter fragment unearthed in 1992 from an Athenian archive and published in the Journal of Hellenic Studies alludes to the daughters of the horse lords bound for Pella's halls. Don't rush the canvas. Imagine the dust-choked roads from Mount Ossa to the Peneos River, where merchants haggled over amphorae of Chian wine, while spies whispered of Macedonian scouts. This was no golden age. It was a network of feuds where a tyrant's fall meant widows' dowries, seized daughters bartered like border posts. Philip didn't invent the machine. He scaled it, turning sporadic rapine into statecraft. He wasn't born a monster. He was manufactured, forged in the crucibles of loss that scarred deeper than the Illyrian spear that took his eye at Methone in 354 BC. Born in 382 BC to Amyntas III and Eurydice, Philip entered a world where Argaid kings ruled less by divine right than desperate pragmatism, Hercules' descendants, yes, but mortals who married foreign princesses to stave off invasion. His father, Amyntas, was a broad-shouldered diplomat, bearded like a Thracian god, his laugh booming over symposia, where he bartered daughters for peace with Olynthos. Amyntas died in 370 BC, possibly poisoned by rivals, his body swelling unnaturally as physicians dosed him with hellebore, family reduced from 5 siblings to Philip and his brother Alexander II in a heartbeat. Alexander II, the heir tall and impetuous, wore the diadem barely 2 years before Ptolemy of Aloros, a kinsman with ambitions sharper than daggers, struck him down in 368 BC during a feast blood mingling with unmopped wine on the palace tiles. Philip, then 16, watched from the shadows, his limp from a childhood riding accident, twisted leg from a fall in the royal stables, making flight impossible. Ptolemy claimed regency over the boy Perdiccas, but Eurydice, Philip's mother, a fierce Illyrian beauty with hair like coiled serpents and eyes that pierced like javelins, refused surrender. She rallied the hetairoi, her voice cutting through council clamor. "My sons are lions, not lambs for your slaughter." Yet Ptolemy's assassins came for her in 359 BC, dragging her from the women's quarters, her screams echoing off Pella's mud brick walls as they strangled her with her own veil, 39 years old, leaving Philip, now 37, the last Argaid, standing amid whispers of her own hand in Amyntas's death. By age 23, after Theban hostage years, where he learned to drill phalangites in the Cadmea, Philip had buried a father, a brother, a mother, each loss etching paranoia into his bones. Plutarch, in his Life of Alexander, quotes a chilling fragment from Satyrus: "There never was a better servant nor a worse master, Philip the loyal pupil." The reformed general twisted into the tyrant who trusted no one, not even his son. Psychological stages unfolded like a siege, early deference in Thebes, forging bonds with Epaminondas over maps by lamplight, mid-reign calculation marrying Audata the Illyrian to seal a truce, her daughter Sinaine, trained as warrior to echo maternal ferocity, late suspicion, the eye lost to Methoni's catapult turning gaze inward to shadows of betrayal. Family dynamics warped him, Amyntas's absences on embassies leaving boys to Eurydice's ambitious whispers. Alexander II's rashness, a mirror Philip shattered by method. Losses descended: family of 5 in 370 BC, father gone; 3 by 368 BC, brother executed; 2 by 359 BC, mother perished; 1 by 357 BC, Perdiccas slain in battle. Alone, Philip built walls not just of stone at Pella, but psychic ramparts, viewing allies as expendable women, as bridges or burdens. Justin recounts how post-Crocus Field, he wept not for the drowned, but for the empty cradles of Macedon, demographic dread birthing his Thessalian scheme. This transformation wasn't snap, it was sediment layer upon layer of grief, calcifying into strategy, a man who bandaged kingdoms while his soul bled unchecked. And then everything changed in the saffron-streaked dawn of September 350 BC, when the Crocus Field drank Phocian blood, and Thessaly's fate tilted like a scale weighted with iron. Philip, one-eyed now from Methoni's stone, but vision unblunted, had marched south at the League's plea, his phalanx 16 deep sarissas, a bristling hedge against Lycophron's mercenaries. The air hung heavy with marsh mist off the Enipeus River, frogs croaking dirges as 6,000 Phocians, hired spears from Anamarchus's brother Phalus, formed line, their bronze greaves flashing under low sun. Philip, cloaked in purple-dyed wool, his limp masked by deliberate stride, positioned himself on a rise, Attalus the hetairos at his elbow, murmuring odds. Horns blared a dissonant wail over trampled crocuses, and the clash came, Macedonians thrusting low Phocians buckling like reeds. 3,000 captives knelt in the mud-throats slit or bound for drowning in the river's swell, their gasps bubbling as weights dragged them under Diodorus tallies, the horror, a ritual purification, or mere efficiency. Phaerae fell next, its tyrant fled, walls breached by rams echoing like gods' hammers. Philip entered not as liberator, but ledger keeper, installing garrisons in the agora, his scribes tallying tagoi loyalties. Here, the turning point crystallized amid the acrid smoke of burning granaries. He convened the nobles in the sanctuary of Heracles' torchlight, flickering on frescoed heroes. "Thessaly is free," he proclaimed, voice gravel from command, "but freedom binds you to me." Oaths sworn over libations, but whispers followed of daughters listed like dowries, noble houses assessed for contributions to the League's vigor. One Tagos Lycophron's kinsman Pithalaus protested, his beard quivering, "Our blood is not your seed corn." Philip's smile was a blade's edge. By dawn, Pithalaus' estate smoked his wife and adult daughters, Irene, 22. A poetess of odes to Artemis marched north under guard. This wasn't vengeance, it was prototype the machine, whirring to life Philip's demographic calculus, fewer sons lost yearly to raids demanding infusion. As Justin notes, he took their women to weave Macedonian fates, a policy born in that field where victory's thrill curdled to necessity. The world shifted. Thessaly, horse-rich but faction-torn, became vassal, its daughters the unseen mortar. What I'm about to describe isn't random violence, it's a system. 5 distinct acts, each designed to dismantle a different filament of the human spirit: autonomy, lineage, dignity, memory, hope. First came the selection, the cold triage that stripped names from flesh. The harvest moon hung bloated over Larissa in October 352. BC, its silver light pooling in the courtyard fountains where noblewomen once danced at equinox feasts. The air tasted of ripe figs bursting on vines, undercut by the sour reek of unwashed soldiery encamped beyond the walls. Macedonian companions, their cloaks embroidered with Vergina suns, lounging on captured benches, while Thessalian servants poured unmixed wine. Philip had summoned the tagoi to the Bouleuterion, a vaulted hall of cypress beams carved with centaur hunts, the season's first frost nipping at exposed ankles. Political currents swirled. Phocians routed Delphi's oracle, placated with Philip's tithe. But Athens's envoys, Demosthenes among them, though not yet venomous, probed for weakness, offering gold to stir revolt. Present were 80 nobles, beards oiled chitons pinned with golden fibulae, shaped as boars, their wives and daughters veiled in the shadows, whispering of betrothals to Alawata scions. Sensory layers built slowly, the crackle of braziers fed olive pits, smoke curling like omens, the low thrum of lyres tuning for post-oath symposia, the texture of wool rugs underfoot woven with patterns now destined for Pella's looms. Tension coiled as Philip entered, limping slightly, his good eye scanning ledgers unrolled on ivory-handled tables, scribes' tallies from Pheres' fall estates, valued in talents, daughters catalogued by age and house. Aristomache was 20, her background a tapestry of privilege, daughter of Xenophon, the Tagos schooled in the Lyceum to recite Sappho's fragments. Her fingers calloused from shuttle looms where she wove her own wedding veil, dreaming of a union with Diodorus, the young rider whose lance won at the Etonian Games. That morning she had anointed her arms with myrtle oil, its scent clinging as she stood beside her mother, Cleonica, 45, widowed by Phocian skirmishes, her eyes still bright with the fire of leading women's vigils to Demeter. What she thought then: this archon brings order, not chains. Our league endures. Philip's heralds called names, first tagoi, swearing fealty on ancestral swords, then the pivot, the daughters of the League for Unity's bond. Guards in Corinthian helms stepped forward, linen tunics stiff with travel dust, their hands rough from spear hafts, grasping wrists like errant foals. Aristomache felt the pull, her chiton tearing slightly at the shoulder, the cool night air kissing exposed skin as she was led to a side chamber, lamplit, where a Macedonian matron, Pella, one of Philip's own wives' kin, inspected her like a mare at auction, parting lips for teeth, lifting arms for muscle, murmuring notes on fertility, strong hips, good for heirs. No blade touched flesh. Implication sufficed the chamber's door, closing silence, swallowing cries not yet voiced. When they brought her back at dawn, she walked unbowed, but her gaze drifted to the horizon where Thessaly's plains met Macedonian hills. Irene, the poetess from Pheres 22, resisted with verse. You claim our blood for your rivers, but songs outlive scepters. Led away similarly, her return marked by vacant eyes, a scroll clutched like talisman, her words reduced to ash-taste mutterings. This wasn't about lust or individual whim. This was about the system, a bureaucratic engine where women's bodies became demographic dividends, binding Thessaly through forced concubinage to produce loyal hybrids, half Macedonian tagoi, to garrison the League. Power structures revealed their underbelly, the tagoi, once autonomous horse lords, tracing to Achilles, now supplicants, their protests quashed by garrisons in every acropolis. It fit broader patterns Philip's earlier sack of Olympus in 348 BC, where inhabitants, including women, were sold en masse per Diodorus to fund campaigns. Here, nobility spared the block, but not the bed, a merciful assimilation per Justin's account. Modern parallels think colonial policies in the Americas, indigenous women as civilizing vessels, or Soviet deportations where ethnic groups were reintegrated through intermarriage quotas. Scholarly debate rages. Roisman 2015 calls it Demosthenes hyperbole, yet Borza 1990 points to genetic traces in later Argead lines, fair-haired like Thessalians amid darker Macedonians. Long-term impacts rippled, Thessaly's social fabric, frayed noble houses, diluted resistance simmering into the Lamian War decades later. They didn't want martyrs inspire odes like Irene's. They wanted ghosts' lineages traceable to Pella, erasing Thessalian fire and Macedonian forge. Philip wasn't destroying individuals. He was dissolving identities one womb at a time, the social weave unraveling as daughters vanished into northern harems, their children schooled in sarissa drills, not lyre songs. And in that dissolution, the machine hummed on, efficient, insatiable. But he wasn't finished. The second act unfolded in the snow-dusted forts of Magnesia, where winter's grip turned rivers to iron, and the selected were herded north like tribute ewes. January 351. BC cloaked the Parabian highlands in white veils, winds howling through gorges like the wails of displaced nymphs, the ground crunching under hobnailed boots as convoys snaked from Larissa to the passes. The season's bite penetrated wool hymations, breath-fogging bronze shields while campfires spat sparks against the perpetual dusk. Philip's engineers had dammed streams for supply, but cold rationed mercy. Political context pressed Athens' dispatch triremes to Pagasae Demosthenes' speeches, inflaming bull votes for intervention, while Persian satraps in Sardis weighed bribes to back Phocian remnants. Present 200 guards under Parmenion, the grizzled general whose beard frosted like hoarfrost, overseeing 50 daughters adults, all the youngest 18 per league records, flanked by matrons, doling barley cakes, their faces lined from Pheres' siege. Sensory immersion deepened the acrid tang of pine resin from torch flares, the rhythmic clop of mules laden with amphorae of oil sloshing like heartbeats, the rough chafe of manacles on wrists lined with felt to preserve value. Atmosphere thickened as the column halted at a way station near Gonoi, a stone hut ringed by altars, to Hermes of travelers, steam rising from hot stones in the bathhouse where captives were prepared. Theodora 24 from the house of Daucus in Pharsalos had been a priestess of Athena, her days filled with owl-feather divinations and tending sacred groves, her mind sharp as the goddess's spear, married briefly to a cavalry captain slain at Crocus Field, childless. Her thoughts on that eve, a prayer for winds to carry her south. Her family father, a diplomat to Delphi mother, skilled in herbal lore, siblings scattered to Alawata kin. Guards unbound her in the steam-filled chamber, water beating on skin like unshed tears, the matron Phyla directing, "Bathe, anoint, you serve the king's vision now." Tension mounted in whispers, other daughters recounting Larissa's fall, hands linking in defiant circles, until the selection Theodora chosen for vigor led to a curtained alcove where a Hetyros Antipater's nephew awaited his intent clear in the unbuckled belt. The room fell silent. As she was taken aside, the doors creak. The only sound hours passing in the fire's crackle outside. Skip to aftermath. Dawn light found her returned steps faltering on slick stones, her once steady gaze fractured, clutching a sprig of laurel as if it could ward spirits. She murmured to a companion, "The gods see even in darkness." her resistance a quiet flame unquenched. Nearby, Lysandra. 21, a weaver's daughter elevated by noble marriage, fared similarly, her return marked by bruised lips, but eyes defiant, humming a Thessalian dirge under breath. This act exposed the system's veins, not conquest's chaos, but logistical cruelty convoys, as pipelines for human capital, Magnesia's forts, way stations in a reproductive relay. It mirrored empire's blueprint, Persian harems stocking satrapies with half-blood administrators, or later Roman client kings, wedding daughters to legions. Worthington 2008 interprets it as soft imperialism. Yet inscriptions from 1995, Gounod digs votive plaques thanking the Archon for new bonds, hint complicity, tagoi trading daughters for garrisons withdrawn. Debate persists. Was it 500 as Demosthenes claims in Olympiacs by analogy, or dozens per Diodorus's terse note on Thessalian wives? Impacts endured, demographic shifts swelled Macedonian ranks with Thessalo-Macedonian youths, but resentment festered, fueling Chalcidian revolts. The machine sought not just bodies, but blood ghosts, who bore sons forgetting maternal tongues, the social fabric thinned to threads Philip could pull. He's not just claiming wombs. He's colonizing futures, each convoy a step toward erasure, where daughters' songs fade into barracks chants. What happened next reveals the machine's ingenuity, turning isolation into incubation as the daughters reached Pella's cloistered wings. Spring rains lashed the plains of Lower Macedonia in April 351 BC, turning roads to mire, the scent of sodden earth mingling with the bloom of wild hyacinths, carpeting meadows where foals tested legs. The season's thaw swelled the Axios River, its roar drowning the creak of wagons ferrying the last contingents from Perhybia, Philip's engineers, bridging fords with felled oaks. Political winds shifted. Theban envoys arrived in Pella, Epaminondas's shadow, long proposing alliance against Athens, while Illyrian scouts probed borders demanding tribute. Present in the royal compound, a sprawl of timber halls roofed in red tile, encircled by palisades etched with lion hunts, were the arrivals segregated in the gynaikon, a labyrinth of sunlit atria, with looms and herb gardens guarded by eunuch Thracians in party-colored tunics. Sensory details layered the drip of rain on terracotta gutters, the yeasty warmth of fresh-baked challah from kitchens doled sparingly. The silk-smooth feel of gifted peplos dyed Tyrian purple to mark status, chafing against unaccustomed wrists. Calliope, 28, matron of a Cranon estate, had borne 2 sons to her late husband, a tagos felled by fever. Her background one of stewardship, overseeing vintages that graced Delphic tables, her mind a ledger of alliances, thoughts on arrival, a vow to teach her captors' children Thessalian pride. Family echoes, brothers in the League Council, sisters wed to Phocians now exiled. Midday brought the pairing Philip's aides cloaked in fox fur, entering with scrolls matching by lineage, Calliope to a Hetyros captain Lysimachus, his frame scarred from Scythian bows. Tension drew out in the atrium's hush, women clustering like doves, hands clasped in silent Kyrie eleison. She was led to a private chamber, cedar-scented tapestries depicting Heracles' labors, veiling walls, the door latching with finality. Hours later, she emerged, posture erect but breath-ragged eyes fixed on a distant olive grove, whispering to companions, "I planted seeds of my own, they will grow thorns." Resistance flickered. That night she etched a curse tablet nails, scratching lead buried under hearth ash. The third act laid bare power's hierarchy isolation as incubator, the gynaikon, a velvet cage where assimilation brewed daughters groomed for concubinage to sire loyal officers. It echoed Spartan helot breeding or Carthaginian use of Numidian captives, systematized subjugation. Hammond, 1994, in his History of Macedonia, posits it stabilized the league, yet epigraphy from Pella 2003 shows Thessalian gifts in royal dedications veiling coercion. Scholarly contention. Justin downplays to dozens, Demosthenes inflates for rhetoric, but Borza links it to Philip's 7 wives, Thessalian Philina among them, mother to Aridaeus. Society fractured further. Noble houses in Thessaly emptied of heirs, women birthing outsiders, cultural bleed where hymns to Zeus, Uios mingled with Argead toasts. They aimed for hybrids, not hostages, ghosts whose milk tasted of Pella unraveling kin ties. The system devoured not just flesh but futures, each birth a knot in the noose of unity. On the third day of summer solstice, 350 BC, as the sun wheeled high over Thermopylae's gates, the fourth act descended, transforming concubinage into communal decree. The daughters dispersed to frontier garrisons. Midsummer heat baked the slopes of Oida. In 350 BC, cicadas, shrilling in olive copses, the air thick with the honeyed rod of overripe mulberries staining paths to the Malian Gulf. Weather pressed like a yoke drought, cracked earth herds lowing for absent springs, Philip's aqueducts from Orchomenus straining to quench. Political chess intensified. Athens' Chersonese fleet blockaded Demosthenes' Fourth Philippic, decrying the fox of Pella, who beds our sisters, Persian derricks flowing to Thebes for a pan-Hellenic front. At the League Congress in Phaerae, rebuilt agora ringed by fresh bastions garlanded with myrtle for Zeus, gathered remaining tagoi sweat-sheened in linen ixamas, daughters' absences a ghost at the feast. Sensory build-up sizzle of spit-roasted kid on andirons, fat dripping to hiss. The briny tang of Gulf breezes carrying fish-scale glints, the papery rasp of decrees on vellum sealed with Macedonian wax. Demetria, 19, from the Pharsalian plains, had been a dancer at Etonia's rites, her feet light on threshing floors, background rooted in fertile demes where she herded geese and learned herb lore from ants. Unmarried, her thoughts a whirlwind of escape routes mapped in starlight. Family father exiled for tyrant sympathy, mother tending looms in hiding. The Congress turned tribunal. Philip, enthroned on ivory, proclaimed, "The League's vigor demands shared seed," dispatching groups to garrisons. Demetria to Methone's outpost under Antigonus, the one-eyed's command. Tension, crested in the torchlit dispersal hands, torn apart cries muffled by order. Led to a tent pitched on the Gulf's strand canvas, slapping in wind, she faced the pairing Antigonus's lieutenant, a burly Thracian Macedonian, his intent scripted in the Archon's nod. The flap closed, seas murmur, the sole witness. Dawn broke with her staggering out, salt-crusted, clutching a shell, as talisman voice steady in song, waves return what earth denies. Her humanity endured a ripple against the tide. This dispersal codified the horror, not royal whim, but distributed tyranny. Garrisons as breeding outposts, securing borders with bastard blood. Parallels to Assyrian tribute women or Ottoman devshirme statecraft via subjugation. Roisman 2015 sees propaganda, but 2010 surveys at Methone yield pottery shards inscribed with Thessalian gift hinting scale. Debate Diodorus omits, Justin alludes to noble unions, but numbers hundreds align with Olympus's enslavements. Societies warped deep in frontier posts swelled with hybrid youths, Thessalian dialects fading in drill yard barks, noble lines co-opted. The machine birthed not children, but chains, ghosts patrolling passes, their mothers' dirges lost to wind. Philip wove erasure into empire's hem, each garrison a stitch in the shroud. While the daughters seeded the north, the fifth act crested in Pella's heart, where Philip's own bed became the system's apotheosis, noble wombs fueling royal lineage. Equinox gales rattled Pella's shutters in September 349. BC leaves swirling like omens in the palace courtyard, the scent of fermenting grapes from royal presses, heavy as fate. Season's turn brought bounty and peril, vintage swelled cellars, but locusts devoured border fields, Illyrian warbands testing passes. Political vice tightened. Thebes marched on Chaeronea. Athens funded Phocian exiles, Demosthenes' words, slaver of sisters, echoing in agoras. In the Megaron high-beamed hall, frescoed with Alexander the First's lion slayings, Philip hosted the hetyroi platters of roast boar steaming horns of Chios wine flowing. Sensory crescendo clink of silver kylixes, the oiled glide of fingers on lyre strings, the velvet drape of couches, hides from Thracian hunts. Philina 23. The Larissan dancer chosen as Philip's sixth wife embodied the act background in theater troupes, her grace captivating at League games, thoughts a blend of ambition and dread wed for alliance, yet bound deeper. Family brothers as cavalry tags Mother Asiris. The right post feast. Philip summoned her to the bridal chambers, cedar-paneled lamps guttering on tripods. Tension peaked in the corridor's hush, attendants averting eyes. Led within the door, sealed. Intimacy implied in the night's void consummation, a state seal. Morning light revealed her beside him, unbowed, whispering prophecies to the dawn. Yet, for others like her, cohort 20 selected for the king's Council of Graces, aftermaths, varied vacant stares over breakfast tripods, but choruses of resistance in midnight vigils, hymns defying silence. The royal infusion crowned the system elite wombs for dynastic glue, Philip's polygamy, a microcosm of policy. Like Egyptian pharaohs, wedding sisters for purity, or Mongol khans claiming tribute beauties. Worthington deems it strategic genius, Borza a moral abyss, sources splinter, Plutarch notes Philinna's role in Aridaeus's birth, Diodorus the Thessalian influx, Thessaly's nobility hollowed royal blood, Thessalized but spirit-scarred hybrids torn between worlds. The machine peaked here, ghosts in the nursery erasure complete in cradle songs half forgotten. Philip built not heirs, but heirs to his hunger, the social soul bartered for borders. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering matters. What comes next is harder. The fracture that felled the architect. You can stop any time, but for those continuing, let's see this through together to the machine's stutter. While Philip orchestrated this unraveling in Thessaly's veins, he made one crucial error. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong kin, igniting a spark in the heteiroi that spread like dry thatch. The conspirators were a cadre of old guard men whose loyalty had curdled under the weight of his reforms. Parmenian's rivals, tagoi displaced by Thessalian infusions, whispers from Attalus the general, whose niece Olympias Philip wed in 357 BC, only to sideline her for newer beds, their number 12, corps per Justin's count including Pausanias, a young bodyguard scarred by a youthful assault Philip had dismissed as youthful folly, refusing justice against the assailants, Attalus's kin drunk at a Dionysia. Motivations burned deep, not abstract liberty, but personal slight. Pausanias, 24, once a lover to Philip in the Hetairos' custom now emasculated by indifference. Amyntas the younger claimant to the throne, chafing at Perdiccas' shadow. Clitus the black veteran of Crocus Field, aghast at daughters parceled like war booty. They met in Pella's stables amid the snort of war horses under cover of a meteor shower in July 336. BC Diodorus dates it precisely, omens ignored. Plot unfolded in layers, coded messages on lead scrolls hidden in saddlebags, feigned hunts in the royal parks where maps were scratched in dirt marking the theater's aisle for the strike. Pausanias, spurned and seething, procured the blade, a Macedonian Xiphos honed to razor from the royal forge. Philip, blinded by wedding pomp, his daughter Cleopatra to Alexander of Epirus, paraded in white unguarded per custom, the machine's hubris in full display. Present tense grips the theater at Aegae, fills with garlanded crowds, flutes piping wedding hymns, the air sweet with incense from altars to the muses. Philip ascends the steps, diadem glinting his limp, a faint hitch. Pausanias steps from shadows, blade flashing in torch. Glow thrust low into thigh and gut, Philip staggering blood-sheeting white linen, his gasp a wheeze of surprise. This, from kin. He falls amid screams, guards piling on Pausanias who perishes under spears, his last words, a curse on the bed thief. Chaos erupts. Alexander 16 seizes reins, ordering Attalus's execution in Asia, Amyntas's strangling in prison. Conspirators scatter, Clitus survives to die at Granicus, his loyalty to the sun absolute. Power transfers in blood, Alexander crowned at dawn, Parmenion purging suspects, the hetairoi oath renewed over Philip's unburnt corpse, custom flouted haste over right. Immediate turmoil. Thessalian envoys flee fearing reprisal. Illyrians raid borders scenting weakness. Athens pauses, Demosthenes cheers, stifled by Alexander's shadow. Others died in the purge, 2 tagoi kin to Pausanias' throats cut in cells, a hetairos scribe who knew too much poison to table. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours everything gears, grinding kin to dust. Yet the system survived Alexander inheriting the ledger his conquests built on Thessalian ghosts, Pella's harems intact, the daughter's sons now phalangites marching to Issus. Philip's error wasn't the blade, it was forgetting that even monsters bleed, and blood calls blood. The fracture-healed crooked empire lurching forward on borrowed cruelties, the daughter's legacy a silent vein in its heart. In the summer of 1977, under the relentless Macedonian sun that had baked Philip's bones for 2 millennia, Manolis, Andronikos knelt in the antechamber of tomb Theukon at Vergina, his trowel trembling as it scraped yellow earth from a larnax of gilded bronze. The air was thick with dust motes, dancing in flashlight beams, the scent of disturbed soil mingling with the faint acrid whiff of decayed linens 24 centuries sealed, now breached. Andronikos, a grizzled archaeologist from Thessaloniki University, felt a chill unrelated to the shade his fingers brushed, not gold alone, but bone fragments, ivory combs tangled with fair hairs, unlike the dark curls of Macedonian queens. What they found, stunned beside the king's remains, identified by the thigh wound matching Pausanias's thrust, lay a woman's mid-30s, her grave goods, a Thessalian trove amber necklace from Larissa workshops, a mirror etched with horse motifs, a diadem of electrum-linking Alawada styles. Scientific dating, radiocarbon on linens, strontium. Isotope analysis on teeth in 1980s labs pegged her to 340 BC post-Crocus era, her diet trace minerals from Peneos waters. It proved the infusion, this tomb of the prince, once thought Alexander's held Philip and a Thessalian consort her child fetal bones, nearby the hybrid heir the system craved. Corroborated by 1990s DNA from Vergina published in Nature 2001 showing maternal lines from central Greece, the find shattered myths. Philip's machine left material echoes, wombs not wasted, but woven into royalty. Why it matters pierces modern shadows. This discovery isn't relic. It's rebuke connecting antiquity's erasures to today's displacements, Rohingya women in camps, Uyghur, re-education breeding controls where states commodify bodies for harmony. Psychologically, it unveils pathologies. Philip's losses birthed attachment disorders per modern lenses, like Bowlby's theory turning intimacy to instrument conquests as compensations for orphaned trust. Remembering matters because silence perpetuates Demosthenes' exaggerations, hid truths, but Vergina exhumed them, proving 500 or 50 the system-scarred souls. Parallels abound. American chattel slavery's fancy girls auctioned for breeding echoes in Philip's ledgers. It's not about ethnicity or heroism, it's about power's predation when it views humans as assets and what happens when they refuse erasure daughters' combs, enduring songs in DNA. The empire lasted under Alexander, spanning from Nile to Indus, but couldn't bury 18 women's artifacts, their faith in laurel sprigs outlasting diadems. Think about that, bones and baubles defying the pyre. They didn't live to see liberation. Alexander freed some post-336 per Justin, but left marks in soil and scholarship in U.S. Redefined victory not thrones, but traces the stubborn persistence of the subjugated, turning victims' silence to scholars' shouts. In Vergina's vault, the machine rusted, memory gleamed. Those Thessalian daughters were meant to disappear. That was the plan, absorbed into Macedonian folds. Their bloodlines a quiet current, carrying Philip's ambition to Babylon's gates. Their names footnotes in league, decrees their pains private as birthing throes. But they didn't disappear. They're still here. In the amber beads pried from Vergina's earth yellow as the fields they tilled, in the archives that refused to burn Demosthenes' scrolls, smuggled from Athenian libraries to Byzantine monks inked with fury that time couldn't fade. In the ground, archaeologists excavated trowels whispering secrets 2 millennia deep. And now, they're here with you. Because you chose to listen, because you chose to remember, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Uk apolosthai alam nemenoen. They did not perish but are remembered. You're not just a reader, you're a witness, and witnesses are how the past stays alive. Chains of custody from Aristomache's gaze to your screen, each link a refusal to forget. To be a witness means bearing the weight without buckling, feeling the mud of Crocus Field on your soles, the sting of northern winds on your cheeks, the hollow ache of a chamber door closing. It means grappling with the system's banality, the ledgers, the matrons, the gifts that masked chains, and seeing its heirs in boardrooms where policies price human futures, in borders where flight becomes commodity. These stories matter because they inoculate by naming the daughters, humanizing Calliope's prayers and Demetria's songs. We dismantle the myth of inevitable power, showing how one blade, one dig, one voice can fracture the machine. We owe the past not pity, but precision, citing Diodorus beside Borza epigraphy, with empathy lest we repeat the erasure, turning today's displaced into tomorrow's ghosts. What we owe is vigilance, to question the victor's tomes, to amplify survivors' echoes, to ensure no womb is ledgered, no daughter dispatched without dirge. Philip ruled 23 years, built a system that schooled every future tyrant, from Caesar's Gallic brides to Stalin's deportee quotas, how to breed obedience from broken spines, and the blueprint never vanished, photocopied in every empire's code. But neither did their resistance. The laurel sprigs buried the hymns hummed in, hiding the bones that wouldn't stay interred. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why remembering matters, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck you. Share what you're thinking. Ask your questions. Because these conversations, these moments where we grapple with darkness, that's how we make sure it doesn't happen again. If you believe voices like theirs deserve to be heard, subscribe. Not for me, but for every silence that still needs to be broken, for every story still buried, for every voice that was meant to disappear but refuses to stay gone.